நம்முடைய தமிழ் மொழி உலகிலேயே மிகவும் தொன்மையான மொழி. எந்த தேசத்திடம் இருக்கின்றதோ அந்த தேசத்திடம் பெருமிதம் பொங்க வேண்டுமா கூடாதா சொல்லுங்க.
செம்மொழி வலையொலி யூடியூப் சேனல். இந்த சேனலின் மூலமாக, அந்த வலையொலியின் மூலமாக பல்வேறு தகவல்களை தினந்தோறும் நாங்கள் வழங்கி கொண்டிருக்கக்கூடிய அந்த நிலையில் சிலப்பதிகாரம் என்ற தலைப்பில் ஒவ்வொரு பகுதியாக வழங்கக்கூடிய அந்த தொகுப்பை முழுமையாக கண்டு பார்க்கலாம்.
The title of this paper is On the Human Predicament, Shakespeare and the Sangam Poets, a comparative study of the world views of Shakespeare and the Sangam poets is neither odious nor far-fetched, even though they were poles apart with regard to time, distance and cultural backgrounds. Shakespeare lived in the Elizabethan England of the 16th century, whereas the Sangam poets were a group of poets who flourished in the southern part of India more than 20 centuries ago. Shakespeare proudly calls the nation of his birth, that is England, a nest of singing birds. This is equally true of the Tamil land of Sangam bards. If drama was the dominant form during the Elizabethan and Jacobean times, dramatic lyrics and monologues of a distinct type were the most sought after during what is considered the period of the third Sangam. Shakespeare had to handle a language which has already been used by a few generations of poets, including Chaucer and Spenser, and a literary form that had been put to use by the pioneering playwrights like Lilly, Peel, Greene, Kidd, Marlowe and Ben Jonson. The Sangam poets inherited a great poetic tradition backed by an advanced poetics unknown to other lands and cultures, and a language which had been consciously developed into a remarkably pliable poetic medium. If the comparison is limited to their views on the human condition, we do get certain otherwise unavailable insights into their writings which have a secure place in world literature. The supreme merit of Shakespeare is that he held the mirror to nature, as he was endowed with the genius to observe life closely and to meditate on it deeply. As one of his eminent contemporaries, Ben Jonson, states, nature herself was proud of his designs and joyed to wear the dressing of his lines, which were so richly spun and woven so fit, as since the will vouchsafe us often wit. When both of them were active as playwrights, Ben Jonson condemned his more successful rival as an upstart crow shining in borrowed feathers, but later heartily conceded that though life is the poet's matter, nature cannot take all the credit for the matchless excellence of Shakespeare's plays, as it was his supreme art which transformed nature itself. According to Ben Jonson, Shakespeare was a poet born as well as made. And Jonson says, "Yet must I not give nature all. Thy art, my gentle Shakespeare, must enjoy a part. For though the poet's matter nature be, his art doth give the fashion, and that he who casts to write a living line must sweat. It was Coleridge who in his lectures on Shakespeare convincingly demonstrates that Shakespeare was not to be regarded as an automaton of genius, but as one who, in addition to being a poet, was a logician, a philosopher, and a metaphysician, and possessing the isemplastic power of imagination, could produce immortal works. The salient features of Sangam poems, now accepted to be unsurpassed in world literature, are clearly identified by A.K. Ramanujan, who was largely responsible for securing universal recognition and great critical acclaim for them by his English renderings of a considerable number of them. Ramanujan says about Sangam writings, look at the classical Tamil poem, their attention to experience, yet their attention to the object is not to create the object of the imagist, but the object as exacting human experience. The scene always a part of the human scene. The poetry of objects always a part of the human perception of self and distress. The ability to engage entirely the world of things, animals, trees and people, attending to their particularity, making poetry out of it and making them speak for you. This seems to me extraordinary, he says. But the ancient Tamils were a community, a Sangam of poets, and a reality, they shared a reality. Not a fabulous mythology, but the realities of nature and culture used as a symbolism, a language within a language, which allowed them to write with a tremendous economy and allusiveness. George Hart also stresses the view that Sangam writings provide a Tamil perspective on life and on human experience that is quite different from anything found in Sanskrit, Latin, Greek or any other language. If the subject matter of Aham poets is man-woman love, what are called Puram poems deal with almost all aspects of life, such as war, fame, poverty, philanthropy, friendship, education, sense of shame, fear of blame, life of a householder, renunciation, children, farming, widowhood, chastity, and transitoriness of youth, life, and of wealth. Of the two broad classifications of poems unique to Tamil, Aham may be taken to mean noumenon and Puram phenomenon. The ancient Tamils lived life to the lees and composed exquisite poems on the life here and now without indulging in vain speculations about the state before birth and after death. They could see earthly life steadily and as a whole, as they were not very much obsessed with what is unknown and what may never be disclosed to mankind. And this is the reason why they could write poems which have been praised by Pierre Mail in the following words, a French scholar. He says about Sangam writings, short, elegant and unexaggerated, almost always lively and animated with very human feelings, sometimes of most poignant emotion. They are classics in the fullest sense, more sober and less rhetorical than Pindar, who is the best term of comparison. They are the only literary, that is Sangam writings according to him, they are the only literary productions of India which are free of conceits and which without abusing intellectual virtuosity, have the grace, the balance and the sobriety of Greek art. The hero portrayed in a Shakespearean tragedy is, in the words of A.C. Bradley, a doomed man who with others drift, struggling to destruction like helpless creatures borne on an irresistible flood toward a cataract. Their fault is far from being the sole or sufficient cause of all they suffer. The power from which they cannot escape is relentless and immovable. The player king in Hamlet says, "Our thoughts are ours, their ends none of our own," meaning that though the thoughts are ours, the issues or outcomes of our thoughts are not our own. These characters seem to fight blindly in the dark. The power that works through them makes them the instrument of a design which is not theirs. They act freely, but their action fetters them. It is evident that they do not understand themselves or the world about them. When we watch these characters trying to translate their thoughts into deeds, we feel the blindness and helplessness of man. Men act in accordance with their own character, but there is something that brings them just the one problem which is fatal to them, and sometimes brings it to them just when they are least fitted to it. On the other hand, we find no trace of fatalism in its primitive, crude and obvious forms in a Shakespearean tragedy. The actions and sufferings of the persons are not thrown to be arbitrarily fixed beforehand without regard to their feelings, thoughts and resolutions. We are not made to feel that the supreme power has a special spite against a family or an individual. In Greek tragedies, a family owing to some hideous crime or impiety in early days is doomed to experience a career of portentous calamities and sins. But as Bradley asserts, Shakespeare does not have any interest in heredity. In a Shakespearean tragedy, fate does play a role, but human action is presented as the central fact and as the main cause of the catastrophe. Poetic justice, meaning that prosperity and adversity are distributed in proportion to the merits of the agents, is absent from Shakespeare's representation of life, but what we find in it is that the doer must suffer. Villainy does not remain victorious at the end, but we do not find an assignment of amounts of happiness and misery or an assignment of life and death in proportion to merit. The predominant power, whatever that may be, is not represented as poetically just. Bradley points out that the ultimate power in the tragic world that is created by Shakespeare is a moral order which does not show itself indifferent to good and evil or equally favorable or unfavorable to both, but shows itself alien to good and alien from evil. The tragic hero in a Shakespearean play suffers from some imperfection or defect, irresolution, precipitancy, pride, credulousness, simplicity and excessive susceptibility to sexual emotions. These defects or imperfections are evil and they contribute to the conflict and catastrophe. These characters are themselves the authors of their proper woe. The center of the tragedy lies in action issuing from character or in character issuing in action. The calamities and catastrophes follow from the deeds of men, and the main source of these deeds is character. As Bradley explains, the dictum that with Shakespeare character is destiny is no doubt an exaggeration, and one that may mislead, for many of his tragic personages, if they had not met with peculiar circumstances, would have escaped a tragic end and might even have lived fairly untroubled lives. But this character is destiny, that dictum is the exaggeration of a vital truth. Though some of the characters speak of gods or of God, of evil spirits or of Satan, of heaven and of hell, and though ghosts make their appearance, these do not materially influence Shakespeare's representation of life. The Elizabethan drama was almost wholly secular. While Shakespeare was writing, he practically confined his view to the world of non-theological observation and thought, and represented it in one and the same way, whether the period of the story is pre-Christian or Christian. Different views are expressed on the role of fate, on the planetary influence, and on predetermination by the characters in Shakespeare's plays, depending upon their nature and station in life. The chief villain of the play, King Lear, Edmund, tells his father that the stars cannot be blamed for what the human beings do. When the Earl of Gloucester says that these late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us, his son replies, "This is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we are sick in fortune, often the surfeit of our own behavior, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon and the stars, as if we were villains by necessity, fools by heavenly compulsion, knaves, thieves and treachers by spherical predominance, drunkards, liars and adulterers by an enforced obedience of planetary influence, and all that we are evil in by a divine thrusting on, an admirable evasion of whoremaster man to lay his goatish disposition to the charge of a star." The miseries of earthly life are highlighted in the most tragic of Shakespeare's tragedies. The protagonist of King Lear, who is more sinned against than sinning, he cries, "When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools." The mad king bemoans what man has done to man, and how hypocrisy and corruption have made life unbearable to the good and the honest. These are the statements made by King Lear in that great tragedy. He says, "Thou hast seen a farmer's dog bark at a beggar, and the creature runs from the cur. These thou mightest behold the great image of authority. A dog is obeyed in office. Thou rascal beadle, hold thy bloody hand. Why dost thou lash that whore? Strip thine own back, thou hotly lust to use her in that kind for which thou whippest her. The usurer hangs the cozener. Through tattered clothes, small vices do appear. Robes and furred gowns hide everything. Plate sin with gold, and the strong lance of justice hurtles, breaks. Arm it in rags, a pygmy's straw does pierce it." These are the statement observations made by King Lear when he has gone mad. To what extent do the stars or the gods impact on our lives? In Julius Caesar, one character says, "Men at some time are masters of our fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings." Another character believes what can be avoided, whose end is purposed by the mighty gods. It seems to me most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come. It seems strange that the last two utterances on the helplessness of man are made by the mighty Julius Caesar himself. If in King Lear one character complains, "As flies to wanton boys are we to gods, they kill us for their sport," another almost justifies the ways of God to men, even though the latter has also had its own share of the dreadful disease of life. This character says, "The gods are just, and of our pleasant vices make instruments to plague us. The dark and vicious place where thee he got cost him his eyes."